I'm Seth Masenko at the Department of Marine Affairs, University of Rhode Island. Well, I think it's important just because it seems to me that if you look at the construction of catch-share fisheries all around the world, it's one of the things that people don't spend that much time paying attention to in terms of, for example, program design. Then when the programs get established and people, for various reasons, have concerns or objections, I think oftentimes you'll find that some of the strongest, most serious concerns are a direct result from the practice of leasing and from inattention to maybe trying to control or direct leasing during the program design stage. So, I think you could argue it's probably the most important thing that shapes the future of how the fishery looks afterwards. Well, I think what happens is that, the whole sort of business of fishing and the whole culture of fishing gets transformed by the fact that you've now allowed a select group of people to profit not off hard work and going fishing and what used to make people highliners, but you've now got people profiting off of exclusive control over just access to the fishery. I mean, people oftentimes say, well, we privatized the fishery, and then people respond back and say, oh no, the fish are still a public resource. But what you're really leasing is access. And this was something that, nobody had rendered into a commodity, and now an exclusive group is doing it. They're no longer profiting from the business of fishing. They're profiting from the business of leasing access. And I think that that's what, over time, it both divides a community. If you've got a strong sense of community in a fishery, it divides the community into haves and have-nots. It also, as the leasing costs rise, and they inevitably do, and sometimes stratospherically, it produces this very significant barrier to new entry that the next generation faces. Up until recently, the most significant or sort of outrageous, you might even say, example that I knew of was in the Alaskan fisheries, both in halibut and red king crab, where the lease rates, not across the board, but there are known cases of lease rates of 80%. And this is where I say I don't think people are paying attention to this. You go into this fishery and now all of a sudden somebody is getting 80% of the landed value of the fish for nothing other than the lease of the access right. That means the people that are actually out on the water are only keeping 20%. And they're paying for the entire operation of crew, fixed costs, fuel, bait, all those things, out of this 20%. Well, I mean, yeah, obviously, if you had put some thought into it before the program was designed, that would have been preferable, but you are where you are. I mean, I think that you could look at, if the concern is the deep pockets are winning in the leasing game, I mean, one thing you could say, I don't know if it's politically feasible, but you could say, look, if you're leasing, leased fish, leased shares have to be done on an owner-on-board basis. So there's something that attempts to level the playing field and get it back to real fishermen actually doing the leasing. You're not really challenging the leasing in that sense, and you're not challenging who's collecting the proceeds from leasing, but at least you'd be trying to sort of rein in the market a little bit. I think you could look at how the leases are actually paid. That's a more complicated discussion. So my advice would be, they tried to rein in leasing from the start in Alaska in the halibut and sablefish program. So you might look there, and you might talk with people that are in that fishery to see if they think that anything they've tried there has worked to moderate these effects. I know they've got pretty steep leases, though. So I think, again, one obvious suggestion might be an owner-on-board provision. In New England, it's a place where they sort of initiated this concept of so-called community permit banks. But my understanding and my view on this is very few, if any of them, are really community permit banks. These are third-party holding companies, and we know nothing or next to nothing about the sort of where do the proceeds of the lease profits go. You could try and examine restructuring that whole thing to say, you know, any leasing must be done through community permit banks, and put in some sort of definitions about what is a community permit bank.